Did you know Final Fantasy VII's core theme came from a real tragedy? Creator Hironobu Sakaguchi lost his mother while making Final Fantasy III. He said, "I've been thinking about the theme of life ever since." That grief became the heart of VII, the life stream, Aerith's death, the cycle of life and return to the planet. Sakaguchi even admitted, "Maybe this was my way of overcoming the grief I was experiencing." It wasn't just a game. It was therapy in disguise. Did you know early on Square described Mako as a dark form of magic? They said, "Mako is a dark form of magic, and its corruption of the Shinra Corporation has created a police state." Originally, Mako wasn't just energy. It was twisted magic, like a darker version of Final Fantasy VI's Magitech. It shows how Final Fantasy VII blurred science and sorcery, the perfect evolution of fantasy tech lore. Final Fantasy VII was too ambitious for cartridges. Sakaguchi admitted, "It turned out to be a mega-capacity game. We had to choose CD-ROM. We became too aggressive and got ourselves into trouble." VII's seamless movies and huge visuals simply couldn't fit on an N64 cartridge, so Square went all in on PlayStation. That bold choice changed gaming history forever. Square once claimed Final Fantasy VII would take the average player 120 hours to beat. The quest is huge, spanning 3 CDs, with an average completion time of 120 hours. That's nearly double what most players actually spent, around 40 to 60 hours. In the 90s, game marketing loved to brag about length. But in Final Fantasy VII's case, it also showed just how massive and ambitious the game's world really was. When Square moved Final Fantasy to 3D, it was such a massive leap. They had to hire entirely new teams. Kitase said, "All of a sudden we had new people coming in using software like Power Animator and Softimage, tools we'd never even heard of before." These weren't just game devs. Some came from film and industrial design. For the old-school sprite artists, it was terrifying, but also electrifying. That's how Final Fantasy VII became a true revolution in gaming. By the time Square was interviewed by English-language magazines about Final Fantasy VII in 1997, it had already sold 5 million copies in Japan alone. It's sold 5 million copies already in Japan. That was unheard of back then. FF7 wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. It became the best-selling RPG in Japan and cemented the PlayStation as the console for cinematic storytelling. Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy, once said in an interview about VII, "I don't want my games to be like movies. I want them to surpass movies." He believed games could create deeper emotions because players live the story, not just watch it. That vision became Square's DNA, and you can feel it in Final Fantasy VIII, IX, and X. Did you know Final Fantasy VII was once compared to Resident Evil? Square said, "At first the system might seem similar to Resident Evil. Your polygon hero can move around a detailed pre-rendered environment." Both games used pre-rendered 3D backgrounds with polygonal characters, a signature of the PlayStation era. Resident Evil's cinematic look actually helped inspire VII's visual style, blending movie-like environments with RPG storytelling. Director Yoshinori Kitase thought Final Fantasy VII's 3D visuals would actually appeal more to Western players than Japanese ones. He said, "I was much more anxious to see how Japanese users would respond." At the time, Japan's gamers were used to manga-style characters, not realistic 3D models. Ironically, VII became a massive hit in Japan too, proving cinematic storytelling could transcend culture. Aerith's death in Final Fantasy VII was decided before Tifa even existed. Originally, there were only 3 main characters, Cloud, Barret, and Aerith. The dev team knew one of them had to die. Cloud couldn't. He's the protagonist. Barret dying felt too obvious. So they chose Aerith, to shock players and make the story unforgettable. Final Fantasy VII had one of the largest development teams in gaming history at the time. Sakaguchi said, "We worked with about 100 people, one of the biggest teams ever." In the mid-1990s, most games were made by fewer than 20 people. VII's production was on a Hollywood scale. fitting for someone who wanted games to surpass films. In 1997, Square described Final Fantasy VII as real-time action with FMV quality animation. Their goal? To make gameplay flow straight into cinematic scenes. No breaks, no loading screens. That seamless blend of CGI and real-time visuals was unheard of at the time. And when players saw those smooth transitions between gameplay and cutscenes, it changed gaming forever. The cell phone game, Before Crisis, altered the Mako reactor battle, influencing Last Order. A blend of both versions was used in Crisis Core. According to the developers, Final Fantasy VII shows Cloud's perspective, Last Order and Before Crisis reflect the Turk's account, and Crisis Core represents Zack's view. Notably, the Turks were wrong about Sephiroth jumping into the life stream and Tifa waking when Cloud arrived at the reactor. Jenova originally had a different battle theme, later reused as the final boss theme in Final Fantasy VIII, The Extreme. Additionally, Edea from Final Fantasy VIII was initially designed for Final Fantasy VII, possibly as a humanoid or Cetra form of Jenova. Her battle theme even incorporates elements of Final Fantasy VII's overworld theme. Yuffie originally had a cut subplot where she was a former soldier hired by Shinra to kill Sephiroth and Cloud. She was also intended to be 25 years old, 9 years older than in the final game. A substantial portion of the Honeybee Inn content was cut, likely because the final version was already pushing boundaries. Red 13 originally had a cut subplot involving a mini-boss squad of feline clones created by Hojo, who would frequently battle the party. Rumors suggest Zack's anticlimactic death in the original game, compared to his heroic last stand in Crisis Core, was influenced by series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi's loss of his mother during production, inspiring human deaths without dramatics. However, Sakaguchi had little involvement in directing or writing the game. Yoshinori Kitase, the actual director, confirmed this approach influenced Aerith's death. At the end of Disc 2, if Cloud's affection for Tifa is high, they share an implied romantic night under the High Wind. Originally, this was more explicit, with a scene of them leaving the Chocobo stable, disheveled and nervously checking for onlookers. Unused, item-obtained messages exist for a teleport stone from a Cosmo Canyon item shop and a homemade potion from Cloud's mom. Neither item appears in the final game. Aerith was originally not intended to die, but the idea was proposed by Nomura early in development, when only Cloud, Aerith, and Barret had been designed. Development for Final Fantasy VII originally began on the Super Nintendo, but was delayed for Chrono Trigger. After its release, work resumed on the N64, but frustrations with cartridges and Nintendo's licensing and censorship policies led the team to shift to the PlayStation, where the game was ultimately released. A late-stage plan involved a Midgar air raid at the end of Disc 2, where the party would parachute into the city. Any characters not in the main party would have been killed in the chaos. The dev team decided this was too bleak and scrapped the idea. Originally, Sephiroth and Aerith were conceived as former lovers or possibly siblings. Party members were initially meant to have job titles, like in Final Fantasy IV. Tifa was a martial artist and Aerith a geomancer, a concept tied to her Cetra heritage and Earth-based limit breaks. Unused text in the game reveals Sephiroth explaining the origins of summons and summon materia. Summons were creatures created by the planet, who sealed their life energy into materia. In the final version of the game, no lore about the summons is provided. A cut idea suggested Jenova referred to a human aspect awakened by Mako to grant magical abilities, later incorporated into Parasite Eve with mitochondria. Sephiroth's Jenova powers would be enhanced, and his madness caused by Mako exposure, potentially making him similar to Kefka. Two unused key items, Letters to a Wife and Daughter, were part of a scrapped side quest where players would unlock a chest in Calm containing the Titan materia. In the final game, the chest remains locked, and Titan is found in Gongaga instead. In Calm, players can find Vincent's weapon, the Peacemaker, before meeting him in Nibelheim, suggesting he was originally intended to appear earlier. Early concepts of Vincent had him wielding a scythe and evolving from a horror researcher to a detective resembling Agent Fox Mulder, before becoming the ex-Turk-turned-undead gunslinger. His detective plot would have kept his shape-shifting powers hidden. Vincent and Yuffie were meant to be mandatory party members, but due to deadlines, they became optional, with Vincent's story mostly cut, leaving only fragments explaining Sephiroth's origins. This may explain his low stats, as his arc focused on awakening his powers. The game includes dialogue for characters in scenes where they are typically unavailable. For example, Yuffie has lines for encountering the dead Midgar Zolom before the mines, Cid has dialogue for the party's first arrival in Nibelheim, and Aerith has lines for the Great Glacier. Crisis Core was initially planned to explore Cloud and Zack's friendship in greater depth, especially after their escape from Nibelheim. However, this concept was repeatedly scrapped. Hardware limitations of the PlayStation Portable forced a focus on Zack's role as a warrior, and later attempts to revisit the idea were hindered by deadlines. Angeal's design is based on an early concept for Cloud in the original game. Early in development, Advent Children was planned to feature only Cloud, Tifa, Kadaj, and Sephiroth, with a 40-minute runtime. Fan expectations led to an extensive rewrite, expanding the story. The TGS 2003 trailer and its unused footage likely reflect this initial version. The creators revealed that Cloud's new limit break was named Omnislash version 5 because it was the 5th iteration they designed. It's intriguing to imagine what the previous versions might have been like. Several minor details in the film, like Rude's extra sunglasses, were spontaneous ideas from the development team that received approval despite not being in the original concepts. Even back in 2003, long before the official remake, director Yoshinori Kitase was already thinking about redoing Final Fantasy VII. He said, "If I were to redo the game, I'd include full voice acting but keep the same plot and scenario." He even hinted that Cloud and Aerith could appear in future titles. Turns out he was right. They showed up in Kingdom Hearts and Advent Children. VII's legacy was already living on, years before the remake even existed. In the remake, Genova's neck is concealed by a metal container. Her blood is dark purple instead of the bright red from the original, and her body is wrapped in a sheet. These changes were made to avoid a higher age rating. According to Motomu Toriyama, depicting the blood trail in the Shinra building was especially challenging due to strict censorship checks. In Remake, Red 13 is a functional playable character and can be controlled through hacking. However, he lacks special abilities, and his equipment cannot be changed as he does not appear in the menu. The remake's files include a model of a younger Seng, originally meant for a flashback cutscene with Aerith. A July 2020 Famitsu article revealed that Roche was meant to appear in the final fight and as a boss in Chapter 14. His finale role was cut to avoid mood whiplash, and the Chapter 14 fight was dropped as his bite couldn't be naturally incorporated. The Ultimania confirms that in the ending scene, while Cloud holds Aerith during the flashes, he speaks the same lines as in the original game. His mouth is dry, his fingers are numb, and his eyes burn. Early Final Fantasy VII plans featured one heroine combining traits of Tifa and Aerith, but the role was split when the decision to kill the female lead arose. In Rebirth, roles are reshuffled. Tifa becomes the one Cloud attacks under Sephiroth's influence, and Aerith shares a new scene with Cloud at the rebuilt water tower, expressing her wish for a childhood friend to share memories with. The Rebirth Ultimania reveals that if the remake series had extended beyond 3 games, one proposed ending point was the Gongaga reactor scene, where Cloud knocks Tifa into the life stream. In the original game, there was a planned subplot where Tifa confided in Aerith that she didn't remember Cloud being at the Nibelheim incident, but it was cut. This subplot is included in Rebirth.